Hey everyone! I gave you a nice big Ash Wednesday special, and as far as I can tell, on Thursday afternoon, no one's looked at it yet, but that is totally fine because it is super fat and you may want to be waiting for a Sunday. But I feel like I need to add something else because, I'm trying to keep up a 2 to 3 day posting regimen here. So if you're new, please follow the playlist or maybe the channel if you also like library science. Today's article, though, is Ableism and Disability Discrimination and New Surveillance Technologies, How New Surveillance Technologies in Education, Policing, Healthcare, and the Workplace Disproportionately Harm Disabled People. This is a long article, so I have a feeling we might be going to 45 minutes to an hour. Even though it is long, though, there's a lot of, big, bulky citations in the middle of it, so I'm not quite certain. I'm, kind of looking at, maybe you're half an hour, but with my luck, probably not. And I think my videos are also downvoted by the, what do you call it? The algorithm in YouTube, because I don't show my face. Anyway, ableism and disability discrimination, new surveillance technologies, how new surveillance technologies in education, policing, healthcare, and the workplace disproportionately harm disabled people. And we got a whole bunch of acknowledgements. And table of contents. Algorithmic technologies are everywhere. At this very moment, you can be sure students around the world are complaining about homework, sharing gossip, and talking about politics, all while computer programs observe every web search they make and every social media post they create, sending information about their activities to school officials who might punish them for looking what they look at. Other things happening right now likely include delivery workers trolling up and down streets near you while computer programs monitor their location and speed to optimize schedules, routes, and evaluate their performance. People working from home are looking at their computers while their computers are staring back at them, timing their bathroom breaks, recording their computer screens, and potentially listening to them through their microphones. Your neighbors in your community or the next one over are being tracked and designated by algorithms targeting police attention resources to some neighborhoods but not others. Your own phone may be tracking data about your heart rate, blood oxygen level, steps walked, menstrual cycle, and diet, and that information might be going to for-profit companies or even your employer. Your social media content might even be mined and used to diagnose a mental health disability. Oh, lovely. The ubiquity of algorithmic technologies has pervaded every aspect of modern life, and the algorithms are improving. But while algorithmic technologies may become better at predicting which restaurant someone might like, or which music a person might enjoy listening to, not all their possible applications are benign, helpful, or just. Scholars and advocates have demonstrated myriad harms that can rise from the types of encoded prejudices and self-perpetuating cycles of discrimination, bias, and oppression that may result from automated decision makers. These potentially harmful technologies are routinely deployed by government entities, private enterprises, and individuals to make assessments and recommendations about everything from rental applications to hiring, allocation of medical resources, and whom to target with specific ads. They have been deployed in a variety of settings, including education and the workplace, often with the goal of surveilling activities, habits, and efficiency. Disabled people comprise one such community that experiences discrimination, bias, and oppression resulting from automated decision-making technology. Disabled people continually experience marginalization in society, especially those who belong to other marginalized communities, such as disabled women of color. Yet not enough scholars or researchers have addressed these specific harms and disproportionate negative impacts that surveillance and algorithmic tools can have on disabled people. This is in part because algorithmic technologies are trained on data that already embeds ableist or relatedly racist or sexist outcomes, will entrench and replicate the same ableist and racial or gendered bias in the computer system. For example, a tenant screening tool that considers rental applicants' credit scores, past evictions, and criminal history may prevent poor people, survivors of domestic violence, and people of color from getting an apartment because they are disproportionately likely to have lower credit scores, past evictions, and criminal records due to biases in the credit housing systems and policing disparities. The report examines 4 areas where algorithmic and/or surveillance technologies are used to surveil, control, discipline, and punish people with particularly harmful impacts on disabled people. These include education, the criminal legal system, healthcare, and the workplace. In each section, we describe several examples of technologies that can violate people's privacy, contribute to or accelerate existing harm and discrimination, and undermine broader public policy objectives such as public safety or academic integrity. So let's start out with something I know best, educational surveillance. Students face various forms of surveillance, from early education through higher education, much of it intended to address 2 concerns, academic integrity and public safety. In recent years, schools have adopted technologically augmented surveillance tools, some of which rely on predictive analysis and automated responses to flag suspicious behavior, trigger investigative or disciplinary action, or prioritize crisis response resources. The surveillance tools can have a disproportionate impact on disabled students and students of color, and likely on disabled students of color in particular. Automated surveillance tools jeopardize students' privacy, dignity, and basic civil rights. In this section, we describe several types of educational surveillance tools, their impact on disabled students, and recommendations to address potential harms. Automated virtual proctoring. Automated virtual proctoring is designed to replace an in-person proctor for testing and allow for test taking remotely. Instead of a human monitoring test takers for suspicious behavior at the front of an in-person classroom, a software program on the test taker's device, or in some cases a human watching a camera feed, conducts that monitoring. Given distance learning and the transmissibility concerns around COVID-19, automated and remote proctoring systems have become exponentially more widespread in both K-12 schools and higher education since the COVID-19, I assume, pandemic began. Yeah, okay. I don't know if we had virtual proctoring, but we had respondus lockdown, which I was about to go on a rant on, but I'll keep reading. Virtual proctoring largely takes two forms: automated virtual proctoring that relies on artificial intelligence and sophisticated machine learning systems, and people-based virtual proctoring that relies on granting strangers access to view students' home environments through a camera. Automated virtual proctoring systems are ostensibly designed to flag suspicious behavior that could indicate cheating, either by use of unauthorized materials, consulting with other people, or having another person take the exam instead of the actual student. The systems attempt to prevent cheating by identifying atypical behaviors or rule violations. Software can use webcams, microphones, keyloggers, mouse tracking, and screen monitoring and recording to track students' movement, speech, activity, and input data. Students may not be allowed to speak out loud, have other people or animals present in the room, access other programs or the internet, or take unauthorized off-camera breaks. Disabled students are more likely to be flagged as potentially suspicious, either by a remote proctor or by remote proctoring AI systems, simply because of the way disabled people already exist and because of disability-specific access needs when test taking. The National Disabled Law Students Association raised many concerns about potential disability discrimination in a survey about remote proctoring for the 2020 bar exam. Students know that behaviors flagged by or prohibited during automated proctoring are more likely to occur because of a disability, such as needing longer bathroom breaks or people who need to use screen readers or dictation software. Additionally, the mere presence of the technology can cause or exacerbate anxiety, which is itself a disability. Courtney Bergen is a neurodivergent white person with PTSD, AWS Down syndrome, and low vision who took the law school admissions test using Proctor software. They shared this story. My experience was pretty awful in a variety of ways. I had accommodations for extended time, long breaks between sections, use the restroom, eat, take medications, etc. However, when I asked the remote proctor if I could use the restroom or get up to take my meds per my accommodations, I was told I could not and needed to remain in view of the camera. Not being able to use the restroom was pretty disruptive to my performance. By the time I got to the last section of the LSAT, I had to pee so badly I would just click in 3 answers to complete the test. Kind of like me in the old days. I'm terrified to take other tests, including the multi-state professional responsibility exam and the bar exam, using this tech given my past experiences, along with a congenital eye condition I have that causes uncontrolled eye movement that I suspect will also get my test flagged. Yeah, respondus sucked. And I know it's like even worse now, but when I had to do it, it was like, picture of yourself, picture of your ID, and then it was absolutely awful for having laptops. I guess the assumption was you had a detachable webcam, because it's like, show us your workspace. You had to like juggle the laptop and show it all around and flash it everywhere to show you didn't have any notes out or whatever, and then it would like unlock. And I don't know if we had like actual people watching us. I never felt that we did, but you couldn't open any other programs. I mean, it was basically, they call it the lockdown browser. So you were taking the test, and you were only taking the test. You're not looking at anything unless you're looking at your phone. And fortunately, I think that AI catches that now. I just remember being a pain. Anyway. Virtual proctoring software that incorporates facial detection recognition technologies raises particular concerns for people of color and disabled people. Test administrators need to ensure the person taking the test is the right person. To do this, they often use facial detection recognition technologies that match the test taker to a photo. For example, one company requires students to look directly into their webcams to complete a facial detection check, and then also uses facial recognition technology to determine whether the person who started to the exam switches to a different person along the way. Yeah, I never thought of that, but yeah, take a photo of yourself and then your license, and yeah, it was fun. It may also be harder for that technology to recognize people whose disabilities may affect their appearance or how easily they can engage with the technology, and this could affect people with craniofacial conditions affecting bone structure, people who've had facial surgery, and people who use mobility devices, among others. Similar bias could affect disabled people with conditions like ichthyosis, albinism, elephantitis, or tumor growth that algorithms may not know how to interpret or recognize correctly. Further, one study found that blind and low vision people who have never before used biometric apps struggle to successfully take selfies to create a facial recognition database of blind subjects for biometrics, especially if conventional algorithms for facial detection and recognition were used. Because many facial recognition technologies are trained on biased data, they often do not represent people of color or disabled people sufficiently, which can lead to discrimination. Research has consistently shown that facial recognition technologies attempt to identify a specific person, and even mere facial detection, which attempts to detect whether the human face is present, are significantly less reliable and accurate on people of color, especially darker complexion people of color than on white people. The 2018 Gender Shades Project showed 3 well-known gender classification algorithms were significantly less accurate based on gender and skin tone, with error rates up to 34% higher for dark-skinned females than for lighter-skinned males. A 2019 assessment by the National Institute of Standards and Technology confirmed these studies, finding that facial recognition technologies across 189 algorithms are least accurate on women of color. Because some communities of color have a higher prevalence of disability, such discrimination will also have an outsized effect on disabled people of color. So I guess maybe that's a plus if you happen to be a person with a lot of melanin and female. People won't be able to recognize you. Get away with things? I don't know. I probably shouldn't have said that. I should have said something like avoid camera detection, not necessarily avoid the law. Even as accuracy rates for race and gender increase, problems prevail. The most recent version of the NIST assessments, released in 2022, found significant improvements across the algorithms tested in recognition of women of color as compared to white men and white women, but disability-related bias likely remains, given NIST test does not incorporate disability-related bias, and facial recognition systems continue to be trained on datasets that do not represent disabilities. Even near 100% accuracy rates will still inaccurately identify tens or possibly hundreds of thousands of people, leading to severe harm, particularly in the areas discussed in the report. Law school graduate Kiana Caton had to take matters into her own hands to mitigate this problem in facial recognition technology so she could take her state bar exam, but this brought other unintended consequences. Sometimes the light Kiana Caton is forced to use to illuminate her face gives her a headache, on top of common concerns that come with taking a state bar exam, like passing the test. Caton has to deal with challenges presented by facial recognition technology. She's a black woman, and facial recognition tech has a well-documented history of misidentifying women with melanin. To ensure her skin tone doesn't lead exam soft's remote test monitoring software to raise red flags, Caton will keep a light shining directly on her face throughout the 2-day process, a tactic she picked up from fellow law school graduates with dark skin. Oh, that's gotta suck. Who wants to sit there with a light pounding in your face the entire time you take an exam? Kiana is unable to take her test without being at a severe disadvantage introduced by the deficiencies of the proctoring technology. Having to endure many hours of a bright light that causes a headache will likely increase anxiety during the test, as well as cause distraction pain, reducing her likelihood of passing. Not because she doesn't know the material, but because the test-taking atmosphere is unreasonable. Back in the 20th century, we just had to put up with stuff. Nobody worried about whether it was reasonable. Y'all just toughed it out. Use of facial recognition technologies during remote proctoring might hinder accurate detection or identification of disabled students and students of color, leading to increased risk of automated flagging and further scrutiny, while also increasing marginalized students' anxiety about the technology that in turn may negatively affect test performance. This type of bias has led to several legal challenges. The Electronic Privacy Information Center recently filed a civil rights complaint alleging that 5 remote proctoring companies violate students' privacy and engage in unfair and deceptive trade practices. The complaint enumerates 3 concerns about remote proctoring companies: the collection of unnecessary and invasive details about students, the use of undisclosed and unreliable algorithms to flag students for cheating, and their deceptive claims about use of facial recognition technology and overall reliability of their systems. In another currently pending case, Gordon versus State Bar of California, 3 California law graduates sued the State Bar after it refused to modify its remote proctoring protocols to accommodate their disabilities, instead insisting that they take the exam in person despite severe health risks of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Gordon plaintiffs sought accommodations from rules that make virtual proctoring effectively impossible for disabled test takers. California's virtual system would not accommodate test takers who were unable to stay in front of the webcam for the entirety of each test section, such as one disabled plaintiff who needed to take unscheduled bathroom breaks, need a paper version of the exam, such as one disabled plaintiff who cannot use a computer screen for long periods of time, need to scratch paper, such as plaintiffs with ADHD, need different amounts of extra time per test section, or use screen readers or dictation software. In an effort to appease the bar administrators, plaintiffs offered to accept invasive and intrusive protocols, such as using Zoom on a second device to capture their workspace, explaining the need for an unscheduled break before taking one, and scanning their bathrooms with their web cameras before use. Oh, that's gross. I wouldn't want to do that. Okay. Test administrators would not accept these terms, instead requiring disabled test takers to schedule an in-person exam despite high risk of COVID-19 for disabled people. They impose this requirement even though people with various disabilities have long been known to be at higher risk for COVID-19 infection and more severe experiences of the disease. Other jurisdictions have considered to administer the bar exam using automated proctoring techniques up through at least February 2022. Use of these systems may also violate the Americans with Disabilities Act, a related state disability non-discrimination program protections, as the ADA prohibits disability discrimination in federally funded program services and activities, as well in places of public accommodation, covering nearly all K-12 educational settings as well as higher education institutions. The technology may also violate consumer protection laws, such as the Illinois Biometric Information Privacy Act. Students at Northwestern DePaul University sued the universities in 2021, alleging violations of BIPA. Both schools required students to install monitoring software on their computers for an exam proctoring that collects vast amounts of information, including facial recognition data, facial detection data, recorded patterns of keystrokes, eye monitoring data, gaze monitoring data, and camera and microphone recordings, to effectively surveil students taking online exams. Use of the automated proctoring software was mandatory to receive passing grades for courses. However, neither university told students what specific information they collected or offered a meaningful chance to opt out of the data collection. Yeah, they didn't really tell us either. It was just kind of like, if there was facial recognition, it wasn't obvious like it is on your phone when you unlock your phone. As of spring 2022, Northwestern students are currently awaiting a hearing on a motion to dismiss filed by the university, alleging the school is not subject to requirements of the BIPFA because it is statutory exempt as a financial institution. Okay, that's an interesting one. So you're a nonprofit and then you're a financial institution. Okay, Northwestern, that's a little shady. All right. Automating student surveillance. Students today are more likely to go online to study, socialize, and participate in community and political action. They are also more likely to face technology-enabled surveillance in their homes, on school-issued devices, and while in school and university buildings. Automated surveillance is likely to have severe impacts on students with disabilities who already face disproportionately high rates of school discipline and surveillance and may need access to specific assistive and adaptive technology for their education. Disciplinary disparities are even worse for disabled students of color, with the National Council on Disabilities stating that racial and ethnic disparities in suspensions and expulsions suggest the presence of unconscious or implicit biases that combine with discrimination on the basis of disability to contribute to the school-to-prison pipeline crisis. A recent CDT study of special ed teachers and families of students with disabilities shows that they are similarly concerned about the use of automated student data to make decisions about students. Of the special education teachers interviewed, 71% expressed concerns about schools using student data that reflects systemic bias to make decisions that could limit educational workforce opportunities, and 64% expressed concerns about student data being shared with law enforcement. Amidst the backdrop of correlations between the disproportionate time discipline and future criminal legal system involvement, expansion of the surveillance technologies in schools raises urgent concerns for students and advocates. These concerns are particularly prevalent when the technology being used to conduct purported threat assessments, monitoring students' social media and activities on and off campus. Yeah, this is definitely a whole new world. Like, okay, Columbine happened like right at my tail end of high school. And stuff before that was a little more freer, and now it's just crazy because it's like, well, so much of this stuff keeps happening, and it's like, maybe just talk to the kids instead of surveilling them and trying to get in through the back door. Like, maybe make a connection with a human. I don't know. Crazy thoughts. Threat assessment. Schools are increasingly turning to automated software to expand threat assessment capabilities in the name of promoting public safety and preventing violence. Today, software vendors like Alice, Crisis Go, and USA Software market behavioral threat assessment software that provides questionnaires and rubrics for school personnel to follow, as well as predictive data analytics in determining whether students pose a threat. I so totally would have been flagged on this. The threat assessment process may ask human evaluators to consider a person's appearance, apparent interests, or friendships or associations. Kind of a loner, dresses real goth, likes to be punk and yell at people, yeah. Additionally, On Guard markets a school safety package consisting of 4 surveillance programs and, among other features, monitor students' personal social media posts using location data, machine learning, and keyword screening. No, your K-12 should not be monitoring this, sorry, that's like a privacy violation. Like, your parents can monitor it, sure, but the school doesn't need to be. These programs are meant to be used in conjunction with a team of human reviewers conducting a threat assessment who are supposed to consider multiple factors, including context when a student or incident comes to their attention. Because there's often overlap between disability and race, we cover the impacts of threat assessment on both. Yeah, this would have been bad for me. I mean, yeah. The internet was not much along when I was in high school. Thank God I got in enough trouble without it. That was like my biggest thing when like stuff started going down. Because I'm like, the outspoken, angry, young people are just a thing. Like, and they don't all need to be flagged. Sometimes you're just not going to do anything. You're just angry. Threat assessment poses a high risk of disproportionate impact on disabled students and students of color who may be more likely to be referred to threat assessment teams. While some research indicates that threat assessment teams manage to avoid racial bias at a superficial level, other research shows that students with disabilities are more likely to be referred to threat assessment than non-disabled students, and that schools with higher populations of students of color are more likely to use threat assessment teams. Additionally, when students are flagged, human reviewers and automated language analysis alike might misinterpret or criminally profile speech patterns, slang, and perceived or observed interests or activities that might be associated with perceived antisocial tendencies or inappropriate tone because they are neurodivergent or who use Black American English, African American vernacular English, aka what we used to call Ebonics back in the day, but I guess we don't now. Those students with disabilities or Black students would then be more likely to be misunderstood or subjected to unjust profiling, leading to discipline and harsher punishment. Additionally, those with racially biased perceptions of disabilities, such as schizophrenia, may interpret benign actions of disabled Black people as violent or aggressive. Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, inappropriate tone. Oh yeah, I got flagged for that all the time. Take the tone out of your voice. I'm like, I wish I could. If it was just that easy. Student threat monitoring can exacerbate and accelerate complaints driven by disability prejudice and discrimination, particularly fears that mental health disabilities or developmental disabilities are predictors for violence. Such examples are readily identifiable in the case of a white autistic high school student in Oregon profiled as a would-be school shooter in the absence of making any actual threat, and a Black autistic elementary school student in New Mexico referred for threat assessment after having a meltdown in which he bit and hit a teacher. Okay, side trip. I smacked her. That's right. So I got to spend as the worst kid ever, which is why I'm like Satan incarnate now. Elementary school. I got mad and yeah, I got in some fight with Jolene Roy of all people, and I pushed her down and tried to break her glasses or something. This is before I had glasses myself. And Mrs. Bastion told me to wait or something, and I must have been 8 or 9 years old. It was shortly after my mom had left us, and I got angry and I punched she wasn't my third grade teacher, but she was one of the teachers that was out on third grade recess detail, and I ended up punching her right in the hip. And the funny thing, while I'm on this aside, so they closed our elementary school because they decided they wanted to put a freeway overpass in there, and I was living in my hometown at the time because I had come back and moved into Dad's house, so I discovered when the school was actually doing its last reception or whatever to say farewell. So, and I ran into Mrs. Bastion. And so 20, 30 years later, I was like, I am so sorry about hitting you punching you in the hip. And she was like, yeah, you hit hard for a freaking little kid. It was a genuine punch. And yeah, like I said, my punishment was it was elementary school, so they didn't really want to expel you. And so in my case, they decided the horrible thing I would do is I had to sit with one of the kiddie desks like they used to have in the principal's office, not up front with the secretary. I had to actually be in the principal's office, his private office. And I just sat there, and I just remember there was a door to the hallway, out the back of the principal's office, and I'd stare out the window at the door, and people would see me and walk by and point at me. She punched a teacher. And then later in middle school, I did not do this. Giant disclaimer. I was around, or not really around. I was in the class next door when I think it was 7th grade. Mr. G, we got punched in the face by a male student. And then there were other interesting altercations in high school. But yeah, middle school's around when I stopped being a little punk and learned to rein my behavior in. But yeah. I would have been tagged for crazy threats because I punched a teacher in the side. I don't think I bit a teacher. I bit a lot of people when I was a young kid, but I don't think I bit any faculty. Yeah, I was that kid. I'm still that kid. Anyway, in the latter students district, disabled students were 56% of all threat assessments, and for the previous year, even though they comprised only 18% of the student population, yes, the disabled, very threatening. Additionally, such monitoring could also lead to or exacerbate racial and religious profiling, such that in programs like countering violent extremism and locally based programs that disproportionately target Black and Latinx youth for gang operations, and Arab and South Asian Muslim youth for counterterrorism and undercover operations. For instance, in separate studies, 28% of Muslim students in New York City public schools report being racially profiled and stopped by police, while 28% of Muslim high school students in California public schools report discrimination by a teacher or administrator. Likewise, Black students represented 9.6% of threat assessment subjects, but only 2.6% of the overall student population. Religious and racial profiling can contribute to mental health distress in students from marginalized religious and racial communities. Makes sense, right? Right? Thank you if you listened to my story about Jan Bastion. And if you're still living down there in that area, please say hi to her for me. I ran into my first grade teacher once. I'm trying to remember what I was doing. I think I was doing census enumeration. And it's oh, yes, I do remember you and your daughter, because your daughter was in your class. It was great. Anyway, social media and off-campus monitoring. Schools have increasingly turned to automated analysis of social media content and other online activities as a way to predict potential threats of violence or otherwise invoke disciplinary authority. Use of this technology is common. Recent CDT research found that 81% of K-12 teachers report their school uses some form of student activity monitoring software, and of this group, 43% report the monitoring software is used for disciplinary purposes. As a result of this surveillance, marginalized students face increased scrutiny from school administrators, putting them at greater risk when algorithms flag for discipline their voices, appearances, and social media content at higher rates than non-disabled and white students. An increasing number of safety management platforms offer monitoring service, yet research shows that automated social media monitoring software lacks nuance and discretion to interpret or respond to dynamic content. Yes, everything is context. Come on now. And even with context windows, you don't have enough room. Some software relies on the use of a static preset list of keywords to be flagged as suspicious or threatening. Oh yeah, that all works out well. This means that if a student writes, "I bombed that biochem exam," "shoot, I forgot my backpack," or even researching arguments for and against private gun ownership for self-defense, they might automatically face scrutiny as a security threat, despite the clear absence of threatening content in these examples. And from the library side, this reminds me a lot of, what they call them, content filters or browser filters. Again, this is why I'm so glad I never had to work in K-12, because it's like, wait, you have to like filter out, like, I understand filtering out the CSAM and the other adult content, but like filtering out stuff about marijuana, and I don't know. I knew people that worked at conservative schools where it's like you can't, allow them access to anything about, pregnancies and this, that, and the other. I'm like, oh my god. But Dad wouldn't want my internet in my house, so what can I say? Allie, as a disabled student of color, is targeted for surveillance profiling, discriminated, disciplined by the university administration and other students, so they shared the following story. It started when I stood up to bigoted preachers. One person fabricated that I was planning to stalk and take out a lecturer. I was angry because he tried to get sexually involved in a student, but I wasn't even planning to confront him. Things I said were taken out of context. Yep, I know how that goes. Other students were stalking me digitally, possibly working together or with university administrators. Sometimes they pretended to be my friends, getting me to vent about my mistreatment, wishing I had payback, taking fake evidence of me, threatening people in ways I wouldn't actually do, based my posts about politics and cops. One time someone joked that if I got removed from the on-campus residence, I should go out with a bang, meaning a loud party with vodka on the floor, paint on the walls, trash on fire. I thought it was hilarious, so I made a joke too, and then I was accused of threatening to burn down the building. Yeah, this sounds like the sort of shit that happens to me. You have my sympathies. Other students monitored my social media, and as I got into first-person shooter games and followed Instagram accounts with gun photos, they were looking for anything. I sent a gym selfie, and one accuser said I was working out to fight someone. I made one offhand comment about missing an old friend because I saw them on campus near my residence. I got accused of stalking. I lost a bunch of friends to rumors. That will happen in life just in general. The university fought against sharing all the evidence, even when the lawyers got involved. I got trumped up disciplinary charges with no proof for any of them. I had a private hearing with an appeals committee to reverse a de facto expulsion. My hearing actually succeeded, even though I'm banned from campus for trespassing for a couple years. I transferred to another school. I don't blame you. Ugh. That's why we need humans and not the bots everywhere. Other software uses more complex language processing and machine learning to interpret students' posts, but can still fail to accurately interpret or assess the content of those posts. That risk is especially high for students from marginalized communities who are not fluent in or using standard English, a particular concern for many disabled people whose disabilities and cultures affect language. For example, one study found that AI programs looking for hate speech were 1.5 times more likely to flag tweets as offensive or hateful when they were written by African Americans, and 2.2 times more likely to flag tweets written in African American English. Another study found that when people were asked to identify hate speech, they almost always disagreed. Only 5% of tweets in the study using words from a hate speech lexicon were labeled hate speech by a majority of participants, and only 1.3% were unanimously labeled hate speech. As those people also write AI programs and respond to their output, these biases will affect an AI's baseline understanding of what constitutes hate speech, as well as how the AI systems are used. And that does worry me, because we already have a very broad definition of hate speech as is, where I'm like, I don't know. I have issues with the whole concept of hate speech and like adding sentencing just because you're like a racist. It should be based on the act, but that's just me, unless you're like doing a conspiracy. Alright. As described above, with facial recognition software, monitoring software in this context also learns to make decisions based on existing information and data sets. If existing data sets already reflect racial, gender, or disability bias, then the algorithmic systems will replicate and reinforce those very same biases. For example, if students and teachers have reported more posts from Black, Muslim, or disabled students as potentially suspicious or threatening, then a software program might learn to assign a higher level of risk to posts made by students who share those characteristics. And then teachers and administrators might be more likely to perceive students from those groups as problems. Additionally, as more students rely on school-issued devices during the pandemic, schools are surveilling an increasingly number of disproportionately lower-income students who use such devices, with 71% of K-12 teachers reporting that their school or district uses student activity monitoring software on school-issued devices, while only 16% report that it is used on family-owned devices. This surveillance may look for potential predictors of violence or even self-harm and suicide, leading to increased scrutiny, potentially inappropriate interventions, and possible profiling. I also have a concern that they could be listening to all sorts of stuff going on in the home and also picking up all sorts of video things going on in the home, some of which may or may not be something that, needs to be shared outside the home. I don't know. I don't like this surveillance technology, but we've already invited the screens in, so it's already 1984, Merely adding a layer of human review to social media monitoring does not remove embedded bias from these systems, as racism and ableism in schools are well documented. The African American Policy Forum's Kimberly Williams Crenshaw notes, for instance, that during the 2011-12 school year, Black girls in New York were nearly 10 times more likely to be suspended than their white counterparts. Since then, nationally disabled students were arrested nearly 3 times more than non-disabled students, made up 80% of all students physically restrained in schools, and represented up to 85% of youth incarcerated in juvenile prison. Current statistics are hard to find, and extent statistics may use inconsistent definitions of disability. Campus surveillance. In an effort to increase campus safety, schools now use a variety of on-site surveillance technologies, in addition to the widespread use of metal detectors and in-school or on-campus police, or as we used to call them, rent-a-cops. I'm sorry, ours were security officers. We only had one police liaison, like an actual police officer came by, I think, maybe once a week. The rest we had were rent-a-cops so we could bribe with fast food. Just went inside the parking lot. These technologies include aggression detection microphones and facial recognition technology used to identify people and their movements and associations. These technologies are meant to identify unauthorized visitors and sometimes to analyze affect, but can result in tracking information about students and staff and potentially replicate existing patterns of racial, gender-based, and disability-based discrimination. Aggression detection microphones purport to use machine learning software to detect distress, anger, fear, aggression, or duress in voices. Oh God, this sounds like a bad idea just from the jump, because I can make all sorts of noises. Anyway, if the microphones detect targeted noise over a certain threshold, the software sends an immediate alert to a designated school personnel with the nature and location of the targeted noise. So setting off a cherry bomb probably means a shooting, right? The school employees can then decide whether or how to intervene. For example, the software is meant to pick up on someone screaming in fear, yelling a threat, engaging in a verbal altercation, which again you can also do in other activities. Yeah, I know my mind's on the gutter, but you know what I'm talking about too. These audio analysis technologies are used not only in schools, but also in hospitals and prisons. Hospitals kind of make sense, because if you start screaming in a hospital, it's usually because you're in pain or something got pulled out of you. Anyway, in prisons, I don't know. Mixed feelings on prisons, because you've already surrendered your liberty, so you can surveil the hell out of those people. They're already in there for a reason. Aggression detection microphones and affect recognition technology raise concerns about gender, disability, and racial profiling, determining which students should be flagged as potentially aggressive. And yes, I'm pretty sure the affect recognition works very well when we get on the phone with the lovely robots these days. I've been told that you need to be nice to them, and they will put you right through. And usually that's our tactic anyways, to let me be nice and then let Dan be angry. Although Dan last time was like, that didn't actually get any results, so I was angry. I'm like, I know. But I tried to be nice to the CSRs, because most of the time they weren't bots, at least until recently. Anyway, these technologies could particularly impact... hospitals and prisons. Aggression detection microphones and affect recognition technology raise concerns about gender, disability, and racial profiling in determining why students should be flagged as potentially aggressive. These technologies can particularly impact autistic students, deaf students, students with cerebral palsy who may have difficulty modulating voice volume, as well as students with mental health disabilities and learning disabilities who express anger and frustration without actual intent to engage in violence towards others. Additionally, the technology is fairly inaccurate. A ProPublica analysis identified hundreds of false positives from aggression detection devices for ordinary and non-threatening sounds, including laughing, coughing, closing locker doors, which raises concerns for students with vocal tics, impulsivity, and atypical speech due to disabilities like Tourette's, cerebral palsy, and ADD. Much like the systems discussed above, systems that use facial recognition technology to identify whether a person is supposed to be on school property risk misidentifying both disabled students and students of color because of the known accuracy flaws of the technology. University of Michigan researchers caution that they expect facial recognition in schools to target and harm vulnerable students. For example, facial recognition is likely to increase the frequency with which black and brown students are singled out and disciplined by school administrators. Also, because facial recognition has higher error rates for black and brown subjects, likely to malfunction for students of color more often than their white counterparts. This could have the effect of further excluding and victimizing already marginalized students. These fears are borne out in early 2020 when a school in Lockport City School District in upstate New York became the first in the United States to adopt facial recognition software as a public safety measure intended to prevent a mass shooting. Less than a year later, investigative journalists uncovered that the private vendor selling the software had lied about the accuracy and reliability of its software, which mistook broom handles for guns and was 4 times more likely to misidentify a black man than a white man and 16 times more likely to misidentify a black woman than a white man. These astoundingly high error rates on basic information, object identification, and racially biased inaccuracies raise further questions about the reliability of facial recognition software in identifying disability-related objects like canes, crutches, or oxygen tanks, or disabled people's bodies. Additionally, surveillance technologies may fail to detect or prevent any signs of actual imminent violence. This is both because of the relative rarity of school shootings compared to other types of violence in schools, and in the case of facial recognition technologies, the even lower likelihood that such violent acts are carried out by strangers to the school. Of course, school shootings are a horrific act of violence that require proactive response and preventative strategies, but automated mass surveillance measures are not only ineffective at preventing such violence, but unjustifiably intrusive and harmful in and of themselves. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I'm like, the risk of getting shot up is still pretty low. But there was that guy at MSU who was an outsider, so don't say it's not outsiders. It's usually not outsiders. So, recommendations. Prior to purchasing, when designing or implementing an automated intelligence system, tracking and monitoring students, consult with and center the recommendations of disabled people and other marginalized communities to help ensure the system does not discriminate against or otherwise cause harm, and analyze with external audits and software to ensure it achieves the goal. After purchasing, frequently assess the software to ensure it's not discriminating against marginalized communities. Be transparent, clear, and flexible when implementing these systems, and educate parents and students about their use and potential consequences, including how the schools attempt to mitigate bias built into the system. Schools should recognize that requesting accommodations is often difficult and takes a toll on disabled students. Schools should make clear that students with disabilities may request accommodations. The process will be easy, and those requests will be met with judgment-free and empathetic responses, which might require administrator training. Schools should also make common forms of accommodations freely available. Schools should not force students to accept constant surveillance. Schools should explain the nature of tracking and monitoring products. Schools should give students and their families a choice about whether to participate. Schools should allow for opting out systems that are invasive or intrusive. Schools should provide students with webcam shutters. Department of Justice and Department of Ed should issue updated guidance clarifying the non-discrimination, reasonable accommodations, and manifestation determination provisions of Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, and the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act apply to school discipline and monitoring brought on by tech platforms. Alright, on to the criminal legal system. I know, we're like almost 40 minutes in. As with other and public and private actors, police, prosecutors, courts, and prisons have increasingly turned to technological solutions to streamline operations and focus resources. Recent decades have witnessed a vast expansion of surveillance technologies that further deepen the problem of mass incarceration and its collateral consequences. Police departments use software to predict where crime will happen, who will commit crimes, and judges rely on algorithms to evaluate which defendant should be released on bail. These uses have downstream consequences beyond intensified police incarceration. For instance, some landlords have automatically disqualified rental applicants based on records of conviction, and even based on arrest records that don't indicate whether the person was even convicted. This can affect a person's rental prospects and housing stability. It can also affect your ability to go to Canada. I have a nice story on that, which I will not go all the way down, but Dan was arrested on something like 10,000 years ago, and we got pulled into immigration over it, and he tried to explain to them, I wasn't convicted. They let me out. It was just in a bad place at a bad time. But they claimed that he lied to him because he had totally forgotten about this arrest he had 20 plus years ago. He's like, yeah, okay, I got arrested for that a million years ago, and they let me out. I'm sorry, I forgot. I'm a totally hardened criminal, Canada. Anyway, this was the start of our falling out of love with our neighbor to the north. Most research reporting and advocacy around automated tools for criminalization and incarceration has focused exclusively on the racist impact of these tools. Increasingly, advocates have also named the importance of gender, class, and faith-based discrimination and marginalization, AI-driven criminalization. Yet these tools are also present in disproportionate tasks to disabled people because of the characteristics more likely to be considered in predictive policing programs and risk assessment algorithms. Ultimately, predictive policing software and algorithmic risk assessments reinforce discrimination and disproportionate criminalization because of data proxies for racial and socioeconomic class, which also function as proxies for disability. Predictive policing software. Use of predictive policing analytics to enable and expand policing practices that are racially biased and thus likely also biased against many disabled people is not a new phenomenon. In 1994, the New York Police Department adopted the CompStat data management system that has since grown into a predictive policing tool, pressuring officers to increase the number of stops they make and enabling officers to instantly access data and analytics about arrest, criminal histories, and parole probation information. In the decades since, law enforcement agencies have increasingly adopted predictive policing data analytics tools and biometric surveillance technologies, including advanced facial recognition software, to allocate resources and target specific types of crimes and communities. For example, the LAPD notoriously used two algorithmic programs to target particular individuals and communities for greater policing. Beginning in 2008, LAPD started developing a program called Operation Laser, Los Angeles Strategic Extraction and Restoration, which used an algorithm to identify chronic offenders based on a point system. A person would gain points for factors like being on parole or probation, having a gang designation, many of which are notoriously inaccurate, or being stopped on foot or in a traffic stop. The department also used an algorithm to predict locations where the department expected higher crime rates that could target those locations for greater policing. The program enabled coordination between LAPD and the municipal prosecutor's office, as well as the city attorney's nuisance abatement program, even leading to police pressure on landlords to increase surveillance at their properties or evict specific tenants. An inspector general's audit described Operation Laser as analogous to laser surgery to remove tumors. Similarly, Chicago piloted a person-based program in 2013. They used data from people's arrest records and social networks to assess their risk of involvement in shootings. The civil rights organization, Upturn, found that 1/3 of people included on the resulting strategic subject list and no history as perpetrators or victims of any crime. Even worse, Upturn found that mere inclusion on the list for any reason was a predictor of future arrests in a self-fulfilling prophecy. The LAPD's original programs were finally shuttered in 2019 and 2020 after extensive legal challenges, including public concerns that programs encoded existing racial, class, and other biases about where police-related criminal activity will happen. Similarly, Chicago stopped using its predictive program in January 2020, but advocates have noted that LAPD and Chicago are still using predictive policing programs, even though they were supposed to shut them down. Predictive policing tools have come under intense scrutiny for replicating and perpetuating structural racism embedded in the criminal legal system. Data that identifies particular areas as more crime-prone and particular people as more deserving of suspicion embeds within it existing prejudices and records that result from disproportionate policing. For instance, higher arrest records in blacks with tenants of Native communities do not necessarily reflect higher rates of actual crime. They more likely reflect structural racism and decisions over which communities are more policed and which charges are filed. Data can be skewed by whether people victimized by crime actually file reports and whether law enforcement actually acts on those reports. Data used for predictive policing may be unreliable for other reasons too. People who are arrested and charged with crimes may not be responsible for committing those crimes. Even those who are convicted of those crimes may not actually be responsible for them for a number of reasons, including the coercive nature of plea agreements, false confessions, and compromised forensic evidence that undergird many convictions. Predictive policing tools that rely on assumptions that past actions actually indicate future propensity to commit a crime are also suspect. These concerns and assumptions exist notwithstanding attitudes about what acts ought to be criminalized or not in the first place. Thankfully, while some jurisdictions continue to use predictive tools, others have determined that such predictive policing tools are biased and thus inappropriate for general use. Some have gone further. In December 2020, Oakland, California became one of the first cities in the country to ban predictive policing and biometric surveillance technologies on recommendations from the city's Privacy Advisory Commission. Similarly, Santa Cruz, California, and New Orleans, Louisiana banned predictive policing and facial recognition software, and Bellingham, Washington voters passed a ballot initiative banning facial recognition technologies and predictive policing practices. Predictive policing can also perpetuate existing prejudices in the policing of disabled people, especially disabled people of color. Disability is more prevalent in communities of color, and disabled people are also more likely to be lower income, meaning that neighborhoods with higher concentrations of people of color and low-income people, which are historically likely to be subjected to increased policing, will also be neighborhoods with higher concentrations of disabled people. Thus, place-based predictive programming can exacerbate the concentration of policing resources in areas with significant numbers of disabled people. Similarly, person-based predictive programs use a range of data to flag certain people as likely threats, including data that can be related to disability but isn't relevant to whether someone is a threat, raising the risk of profiling as well as the self-perpetuating cycles of suspicion and criminalization. For instance, the Pasco County Sheriff's Office in Florida piloted a juvenile intelligence analysis program that created secret lists of students to determine at-risk or potential future crime for reasons including receiving D grades, having 3 to 4 absences a quarter, or being victimized by domestic violence. All experience much more likely to happen in disabled students receiving insufficient support, experiencing chronic illness, or being abused. These risks, which may not be possible to mitigate or eliminate, can only serve to deepen existing disparities in policing and incarceration that impact disabled people. Consider developmentally disabled people, including autistic people and people with intellectual disabilities, are at least 7 times more likely to encounter police. Disabled students, especially black and brown disabled students, were among students most frequently subjected to school-related arrests, as documented in Department of Education Civil Rights data collection for 2017-2018 school year. Disabled people, especially those with cognitive and emotional disabilities, are almost 44% more likely to be arrested than non-disabled people. Many disabled people experience police brutality because of profiling and misunderstanding characteristics of their disabilities. For instance, autistic people and people with mental illnesses may be perceived as being on drugs. By equity people with mobility devices may be profiled as having a violent criminal history, and deaf people may be perceived as non-compliant or defiant for not following verbal orders. There is no place for discriminatory predictive policing tools in a just society. Reckoning with their past and ongoing harms require focusing not only on systemic racism, but also systemic ableism. Further, the dangers and proven harms of predictive policing tools will only end when government and use of all discriminatory predictive policing tools, both person-based and place-based. This work will require collaboration with leaders in the movements for racial justice, disability rights, and disability justice. At the same time, policymakers can move away from predictive policing and its role in mass incarceration by diverting funding to non-police resources and social services instead, including non-coercive community-based support and services. Such funding should ultimately prioritize services and programs led by directly impacted people, such as culturally responsive academic and vocational programs, as well as peer-led mental health and social work services. Risk assessment algorithms. In recent years, courts and probation and parole officers have turned increasingly to algorithmic risk assessment tools that purport to evaluate whether a person will appear in court or commit another crime, using those evaluations to decide pretrial bail, release, and parole. And these algorithms purport to reduce human bias and provide race-neutral means to make critical decisions like pretrial release determinations and parole eligibility more fair. However, evidence shows risk assessment algorithms may actually perpetuate bias because they rely on existing demographic and criminal record data, which already reflect intense racial and disability disparities. A 2016 ProPublica investigation found that in Broward County, Florida, a proprietary risk assessment program used in bail determinations called Compass was nearly twice as likely to incorrectly assign black people a high risk of recidivism as white people. And by the same time, white people facing charges were more likely overall to be mislabeled as low risk by the algorithm regardless of other factors. A plaintiff alleged similar concerns in State v. Loomis, a case that involved the use of the same Compass algorithm in Wisconsin, repurposed for sentencing decisions. While the court allowed the algorithm's continued use, the court limited its use, determining that it could not be used to make a decision about a person's incarceration or length of their sentence, and that judges should be warned when algorithms are incorporated into sentencing. Just as risk assessment scores can perpetuate bias against people of color and low-income people, they can also dangerously discriminate against disabled people. The factors used in risk assessment algorithms often serve as strong proxies for experiences of racial and disability marginalization. For instance, risk assessment algorithms have considered the following: level of educational attainment, which may be impacted by disability discrimination, denial of adequate accommodations or services; past arrest or conviction history, which can disproportionately impact disabled people, especially disabled people of color; employment history, which is likely to be spottier for disabled people due to higher rates of unemployment and hiring discrimination; housing stability, which will negatively impact disabled people who have higher rates of homelessness and lower income on average; and community and family support, which can negatively impact disabled people who are unpartnered, do not have children, have faced removal of their children from their homes, potentially because of ableist discrimination, lack supportive family members, or are estranged from their families because of abuse. Risk assessment algorithms create an inherent conflict between accuracy and disability or race neutrality. For instance, criminal history is the most reliable predictor of new criminal activity within our current criminal legal system. A person's criminal history is also highly dependent on a variety of factors, ranging from simply what actions have been deemed illegal, regardless of whether they should be, to police and prosecutorial discretion, to wrongful convictions. Some groups, especially people with disabilities, people of color, disabled people of color, face disproportionately higher rates of arrest and incarceration. For these reasons, algorithms incorporating criminal history in every situation to determine an individual person's risk is not necessarily reliable. Beyond questions about accuracy and biased input, however, risk assessment algorithms reinforce the existing criminal legal system itself and its attendant problems. These algorithms examine only whether a person should be considered at risk of committing new crimes, but they do not address the underlying causes of actual violence or biases in law enforcement that disproportionately impact disabled people and people of color. Use of criminal records in tenant screening algorithms and other applications. A person's criminal record has ramifications throughout the rest of daily life. Increasingly, tools to screen tenants for apartments, check someone's background for a job, or even check users on a dating site look at a person's criminal record and not just their formal record, but on other data points that might indicate previous interaction with the criminal justice system. Criminal records can also adversely impact a person's loan applications and eligibility for critical public benefits like housing subsidies or public housing. As the use of these tools increases, the approach can end up worsening the already difficult circumstances for returning citizens, formerly incarcerated people. It can also penalize people who have had even a minor brush up with the law or are victims of data misentry or confusion with another person. Because disabled people are more likely to have a police contact and to be incarcerated, exclusionary use of any arrests or criminal records can have a disproportionately negative impact on disabled people, especially disabled people of color. Our recent case shows the devastating consequences of using criminal records in algorithmic decision-making systems. In Connecticut Fair Housing Center et al. Versus CoreLogic Rental Property Solutions, Carmen Arroyo sued a tenant screening company after her disabled adult son, Mikhail, was denied permission to join her lease and move in with her. CoreLogic, one of the leading tenant screening companies, automatically denied the request after generating a report saying they had found a criminal court action related to Mikhail but did not provide any other details or information about the record. Ms. Arroyo later learned the company had referred to records of Mikhail's arrest and citation for a minor shoplifting accusation as a disqualifying criminal record. Even though he was never convicted, the charge was ultimately withdrawn, and Mikhail argued that he did not have the physical capacity to shoplift again. Because Mikhail wasn't allowed to move in with his mother, he was institutionalized for a year. His case is still pending resolution. Poor Mikhail. Landlords and property management companies using tenant screening algorithms may violate the law by improperly including criminal history as disqualifying data. Under the Fair Housing Act, landlords can legally consider only an actual conviction, and that conviction's relevance to renting a particular unit to a particular person and making a housing determination. Nevertheless, tenant screening algorithms may illegally include arrest records even if there is never a full case, let alone a conviction, as they remove the opportunity for the landlord to consider the applicant's specific circumstances as required. Additionally, use of criminal records as a form of tenant screening can cause and worsen racial and disability disparities in access to housing too, since people with disabilities and people of color may be more likely to be arrested, charged, and convicted for a variety of offenses. Tying records of police encounters to tenant screening can also negatively impact survivors of domestic or intimate partner violence, which disproportionately impacts disabled people as well. Although it's illegal to discriminate against victims of domestic violence, when landlords and property managers repeatedly complain that a tenant is a public nuisance due to incidents of violence, this can lead to police contact and potentially eviction. Similar concerns arise with other tools that conduct background checks based on publicly available data, many dating apps, and people with felony conviction records, but as with tenant screening algorithms, they do not always contain accurate information about a person's records, and it can be hard for a person to know the reason for their rejection or to correct errors that have improperly disqualified them. Beyond concerns about accuracy and procedural fairness, the expansion of tools that use a prior felony record as a proxy to disqualify someone from participating in a service perpetuates stigmatization, exclusion of formerly incarcerated people who are much more likely to have a disability. Such use equates having a criminal record with having a propensity for violence or societal risk without assessing the specific circumstances of that person's past history or even the possibility of wrongful conviction, and does so after the person has completed their sentence. Such blanket bans disproportionately impact people from marginalized communities, including disabled people, who are subjected to over-surveillance policing, mass incarceration, and mass criminalization. And this just popped back in my head, the lovely ex-con my mom had living with her for a year. And she lovingly defined it as, it was just armed robbery, Dave. It's not like you tried to rape anyone or kill anyone. I'm like, I lived with my sister who's 10 years younger than me. Okay. Just armed robbery, Mom. Just armed robbery. All right. You think my choice of men is questionable. Recommendations. Police departments must end the use of discriminatory, place-based, or people-based predictive policing tools. Courts must ensure that people facing loss of liberty and their legal counsel understand what types of risk assessment tools are being used by a prosecutor, court of probation, or parole offices, and have a meaningful opportunity to raise concerns about and dispute inaccurate or biased information. Employers, landlords, and property management companies must end use of arrest records and screenings for employment or housing. Employers, landlord, and property management companies should restrict use of eviction, conviction, and other criminal records to narrow, time-limited purposes, requiring evaluation only of directly relevant and recent records and only at the final stages of employment, housing, or other screenings, as in fair chance policies. Ooh, an illustration. Look at all that there. Illustrated by Lydia X. Brown. 3 people look up at a prison, a hospital, a police station, and a school. The first is a student wearing hijab and a large backpack with a tall, thin cane for orientation. Second is a little person with short dreadlocks wearing a work vest with reflective stripes. Third is a person with a dark, wavy hair and a manual wheelchair, wearing a uniform that says DOC for Department of Corrections. In front of them, the prison watchtower looms large while a camera watches from the other side. The path to the school is blocked by a metal detector. The hospital and the prison have a walkway connecting them. Good description. The health industry has similarly taken advantage of automated surveillance technologies. A recent disturbing example of this occurred in January 2022 when Politico broke the news that Crisis Text Line, among one of the most well-known mental health hotline services, was sharing data from conversations with a company that designs AI programs for customer service. While the data was intended to be anonymized and stripped of personally identifying information, people experiencing extreme states of mental health crises contact hotlines like Crisis Text Line with the expectation of privacy in their most vulnerable moments. Advocates such as Kendra Albert at Harvard's Cyber Law Clinic know that even if it were possible to completely guarantee anonymity and data taken from long, detailed conversations such as those captured by the Crisis Text Line, the mere fact that a for-profit AI developer was using data from conversations about people's experience of intense suicidality and other extreme states directly contravenes the purpose of confidential peer support and crisis counseling. After facing criticism from mental health and privacy advocates, Crisis Text Line ended its data sharing partnership less than a week after Politico broke the news. Thank goodness. Thank you, Politico. I don't normally thank you for things, but thank you, Politico. Disabled advocates have long resisted the idea that disability should always be understood solely or primarily as a health or medical issue. Nonetheless, disabled people's lives and experiences are often framed and thought of as private medical problems or public health issues. As a result, health-related data and surveillance are of particular importance for disabled people who are more likely to encounter health-related service settings, use health-related products or programs, and to live in with bodies and minds categorized as health issues. Invasive, coercive, and opaque data collection practices can leave people with disabilities without acceptable options when they seek to exercise their rights. Far too frequently, disabled people are confronted with no-win situations regarding how data about their care and health will be collected, processed, shared, and retained. All too often, in order to access benefits, use an app, connected device, or even secure medical treatments, many people must consent to using technology and the data practices associated with it without having a complete, meaningful opportunity to weigh alternative options and make informed choices about how they want data about their health to be handled. The only other alternative may be to seek out a different provider, which can be difficult if not impossible for many disabled people who struggle to find doctors who are respectful, knowledgeable, have accessible offices, or accept their insurance, especially for people on Medicaid. In a recent report published by the International Digital Accessibility Council, a researcher revealed that of 152 Android health apps related to pregnancy, babies, menstruation, mental health, fitness, and weight loss, 125, 102% disclose that they collect personal information, but only 66 or 54% disclose they collect health information. 21 of the fitness and weight loss apps, 14 of the pregnancy and menstruation apps, and 6 of the mental health apps requested access to people's precise location. I can kind of see it with the weight loss if you're doing like running or something. I'm not so sure with the pregnancy and the menstruation and the mental health, I guess, if you're going crazy. 2 apps expose people's sensitive health information, personal identifying information, including emails and phone numbers through unencrypted transmissions, and 2 apps didn't provide a privacy policy at all. IDEX Team Rule, when it comes to sharing your most health-sensitive data, our laws place a strong emphasis on personal notice and consent, but the notice often means the apps carefully include a vague and legalistic statement about data collection and sharing, and consent often means the person clicks through a jargon-filled document without reading or understanding disclosures being made. The great and wonderful ELUNA and user license agreement. Furthermore, people with disabilities may not be able to individually use certain services and products if they are not accessible. For instance, if tech-assisted systems are not designed to be accessible, people who rely on those systems will not be able to independently access or share their health data without the help of another person. The design flaw can directly lead to privacy harms because disabled people are either forced to forego the service or treatment or seek help and reveal personal health information. Disabled people face a number of issues related to health data and automated use of such data. Below, we discuss medications and medical devices that track compliance, use of predictive analyses to detect or predict likelihood of mental illness and other disabilities, and electronic visit verification technology adoption. Medications and medical devices that track compliance. Increasingly, automated tracking technology has been used to track medications and medical compliance. In theory, tracking compliance could help doctors determine compliance with medical regimens. However, automating surveillance does not necessarily promote better health outcomes and may in fact deter people experiencing medical problems from seeking any treatment. That would be me. If you're going to monitor me to see if I'm losing weight correctly, I'm definitely not bothering you about losing my weight. That's kind of my fear with dealing with this teledoc stuff. Because I'm like, I probably should, because I haven't been told I'm pre-diabetes because I have really good blood, you know. But my body, you look at it and you're like, you should lose some weight. But no. Surveillance deters me from many things.
In 2017, the FDA approved Abilify Mysite, an antipsychotic medication that contains a sensor in each pill tracking whether or not a person has taken their medication, marking the first time the agency has approved any drug with a digital ingestion tracking system. Oh yeah, we're not okay with this. The justification for its development and use lies primarily with the assumption that people with psychosocial disabilities may be inconsistent following medication directions, and therefore will not gain the full benefit of following a prescribed medication regimen without monitoring and assistance. I'm just giggling because, yes, this is me, and I've struggled for many, many, many years on how to remind myself to take my second medication of the day. I can do it all fine when I get up. It's that second round later in the day where you're like, oh yeah, I gotta do that. And I've got it like on an assigned time. When I first started taking meds, I had it like, beeping on my phone. But the problem was I'd be like somewhere else in the building. My phone would be locked in my office, beeping like a mad thing. I'd be like, just walk in my office and turn it off. But I know you don't want to. You respect my privacy, and I respect that. So, but yeah, this would be the sort of thing they'd be like, yeah, we gotta do this to you because we know you don't take your meds. Yeah, people with psychosocial disabilities, much like non-disabled people, may wish to make their own decisions about whether to follow the doctor's instructions at their own risk, or may have a second opinion that differed with the original doctor. Either way, people may not wish their medical habits be surveilled in such an intrusive way. Similarly, invasive technologies exist in some medical devices designed to assist with other disabilities and chronic illness. Continuous glucose monitoring systems monitor glucose levels in a person's body for people with diabetes. Continuous positive airway pressure machines help patients track their sleep and breathing for obstructive sleep apnea. These systems can either be semi-invasive and rely on an external sensor attached to the person's body, or can consist of an implant placed beneath the skin. Some companies that manufacture these systems advocate for rely on the use of digital remote monitoring to maintain compliance and predict the likelihood of medication follow-through. While there may be some positive use of these systems, they still pose significant privacy and surveillance concerns. Patients, especially those with disabilities, may want more autonomy and control over their lives and not to be under their doctor's microscope, even while still waiting to receive treatment. Even if the approach is framed as optional, the power dynamics of a physician-patient or insurer-insured relationship may lock patients into certain treatments, even if it subjects them to constant surveillance. Disabled people are more likely to need medical devices or treatments and less likely to have meaningful access to a range of respectful providers and accessible treatment options. Patients may also worry about the implications of other entities having access to the data because it could be used to make or influence healthcare decisions, predict outcomes, or modify or deny services to disabled people potentially in a discriminatory way. An insurance company may be able to access such compliance data and make decisions about coverage or premiums based on it. In 2019, news coverage revealed a pregnancy app was sharing information about people's struggles with fertility directly with employers in a disidentified, aggregated manner that nevertheless gave employers extraordinary access to profoundly sensitive information about their employees. This sounds kind of nuts. I could kind of see that because this was always like an ongoing thing with being a woman in the workforce. That you always struggle with, because like unlike men where you don't have to give birth as a guy, if you're a woman you usually end up dropping out of the workforce periodically, or taking time back and going to part-time in order to have / raise small kids. And that is the real reason why we have this pay gap. That's why I always drive most people like, we need to bring our pay up. I'm like, we are getting paid the same as the dudes. The issue is the fact that women, more so than men, take time off from their careers to do various things. And, it makes sense with the babies, but, yeah. So that's the only reason why I can figure that, this whole fertility app tracking was like, okay, who's going to get pregnant? Who should we replace? Who should we be worried about replacing? That's just what you need, more female discrimination in employment. Use of predictive analytics to detect and predict the likelihood of mental illness and other disabilities. Oh, the other thing popped in my head, I guess if you'd be possibly using your healthcare benefits to apply for in vitro, but I don't know if that's actually covered by healthcare or not. I would assume not, but I don't know. I'm not interested in having the babies, so. Next section, I'm sorry. A person's sensitive health information, such as whether the person has mental health issues or is suicidal, may be inferred from their online actions. In one experiment, researchers developed an AI program that could accurately predict people's future, confirm diagnoses of mental illness based on analysis of their Facebook posts and private messages in the prior year. In another experiment, researchers created a computational model that could accurately predict Twitter's users' future diagnoses of mental illnesses. In this model, researchers were successfully able to predict diagnoses of depression and post-traumatic stress disorder based on content analysis of the affect, linguistic style, and context from people's tweets for several months, leading up to their initial diagnoses, and were able to do so even with content posted months before the person's first depression diagnosis. Yeah, that doesn't particularly surprise me because, your emotional state when you write things out is, yeah. Big tech companies themselves are trying to get into the game as well. They collect extensive amounts of data for internal research. Facebook already uses its content analysis AI to scan nearly every person's post for signs of possible suicidality and shares that data with emergency responders without obtaining affirmative consent. As recently as September 2021, Apple researchers announced a partnership with UCLA and Biogen researchers to explore potential for iPhone sensor data that includes mobility, physical activity, sleep patterns, typing behavior, and facial expressions to develop algorithms to detect depression, aging-related cognitive disabilities, and other targeted disabilities. Within the disabled advocacy community, many people experiencing chronic or acute suicidality beg their Facebook friends not to report their posts seeking support or help because of Facebook's habit of deactivating or severely limiting account features for people whose posts are flagged as potentially indicative of suicidality, both by manual reports and by algorithm. I don't know if that's what's happening to me on Facebook, but yeah, the last thing I got was something like, your account has been having automated behavior, so now we're going to lock you off even further. I'm like, you already cut me out of Marketplace. It was a nice, good 3 months I spent on Facebook this time before y'all decided to start acting weird to me. I just wanted to buy and sell stuff. I couldn't get rid of my cat, so I didn't market his soul. Next thing you know, Facebook hates me. Anyway, the expansion of existing automated content moderation tools in the near future poses further concerns about disabled people's ability to use social media as a tool to connect, organize, and find support around distressing experiences. Bring back the message boards. People experiencing suicidality may have other underlying disabilities, and chronic and acute suicidality are in themselves experiences of social disability or neurodivergence. Particularly as people from other marginalized communities are more likely to experience suicidality, automated analysis and monitoring for suicidality can have a chilling effect on people's ability to seek support for distressing experiences. Moreover, advocates must be vigilant about additional applications of machine learning programs that may predict diagnoses of mental illnesses, such as use in employment background checks, talent screening, dating websites, or any of a myriad of other applications. Electronic visit verification technology adoption. Electronic visit verification technology is another form of tech-assisted surveillance that directly impacts people with disabilities. Electronic visit verification is used to track various aspects of home care and personal care attendance, such as hours worked and the location where the services were provided. In practice, electronic visit verification programs require people with disabilities and care workers alike to record the exact hours worked, exact tasks performed, exact locations where services were provided in an attempt to combat fraud and increase efficiency. Electronic visit verification use is required in certain circumstances. Federal law requires states to adopt and deploy electronic visit verification for Medicaid recipients receiving personal attendant care services by January 2021. Delayed implementation timeline and will require the same process for people receiving home and community-based services funding beginning in 2023. I'm guessing this got pushed back for the plague. State agencies also use electronic visit verification monitoring. Electronic visit verification systems can be deployed through specific devices in the home, mobile apps, or websites that log real-time hours and location information. Wiley Redding, the white trans man with ADHD, currently provides personal care attendant services to a woman with cerebral palsy. The past 7 years, I worked for a woman with cerebral palsy, and I'm paid through a fiscal services intermediary. They recently started requiring electronic visit verification, which makes doing my timesheets an absolute nightmare. Because of the limitation of the electronic visit verification system, we can't record time if more than one carer needs to be present, like for a doctor's appointment where she needs to use a hover lift, transferring her out of the wheelchair, or one of us is training a new carer, or if we need to run errands for her outside of her home. Also, if we mess up our timesheets and don't realize the errand fixed them within a small window of time, we are not given any back pay. Electronic visit verification also routinely generates incorrect timesheets, even without user error, resulting in lost wages. That stinks. For many disabled people, electronic visit verification requirements are a significant threat to their autonomy. For example, electronic visit verification technologies require beneficiaries to log and approve hours worked. This can be difficult for individuals who may have to log and classify multiple interactions every single day, accurately logging multiple services that may occur during one visit, like assisting with toileting, household cleaning, and assisting with medication, may all need to be logged independently and accurately each time they occur, creating, in the name of fraud detection, a high revealing and detailed chronicle of a person's most intimate needs in their daily life, and at the same time taking time away from actually providing care. I'm now starting to feel even worse for the poor nurse I had to deal with my dad the last years of his life, because he was cheesed at me for even getting her, and I'm like, you fell on the stairs and decided to call me instead of an ambulance. Sorry, somebody needs to come and look in on you a little more frequently, Bo. Although now, as an adult, as a cheap Scottish adult, again, I can understand why he did, because ambulances are way too expensive. Anyway, electronic visit verification can also expose people with disabilities to increased location, video, and sound surveillance. Some electronic visit verification systems use GPS tracking, cameras, and microphones in an effort to log and track home care services, especially as workers may be geofenced to limited locations or required to start and end service provision in disabled persons' homes without any flexibility. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services have issued guidance indicating GPS tracking is unnecessary, but they have also indicated that states are allowed to use it. Additional Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services, a guidance in 2019 undermined advocates' attempts to create less invasive systems by explicitly saying that web-based timesheets modeled on the old paper timesheets were non-compliant because they were not sufficiently detailed. These persistent and passive types of tracking and monitoring systems subject disabled people to unnecessarily surveillance and control for simply receiving home-based services. The current system sets up an impossible choice: either live at home and be subjected to intrusive electronic visit verification surveillance technologies, or receive services in institutional settings. Like other algorithmic systems deployed in the public benefits context, electronic visit verification has contributed to the growing landscape of punitive technologies that target and criminalize both low-wage workers and public benefits recipients. Recommendations: data used for diagnosis, assessment, ongoing treatment of medical conditions, such as data collected by glucose monitors or CPAP devices or health-related apps, should not be used by insurers or other entities that discriminate against people with disabilities and chronic illnesses. Developers and medical professionals should limit data collection and sharing to only the minimum necessary for a specific task. This is what we do in my world. Even so, developers and medical professionals should ensure patients have a meaningful ability to opt out of data sharing, as well as limit or change data sharing settings in health-related software, apps, or devices. Researchers and developers should obtain meaningful consent from people using social media platforms before using or retaining their data to develop AI or machine learning models that can predict or identify mental illnesses or other disabilities. This includes ensuring that people receive regular, meaningful reminders about use of their data and their ability to change their mind and opt out of such research and use, including deleting their data. States should clarify that compliance with federal EVV requirements does not require precise GPS location data, and act to protect workers and people from receiving care from forced disclosure of that data. If you've been hanging with me, I think this is the last section. Thank you for keeping up and listening to my nice little side stories. Surveillance at work. Employers have adopted surveillance technologies to monitor, assess, discipline, and modify behavior of workers, both for purposes directly related to job performance and for purposes unrelated to job performance. Two applications of surveillance technologies at work are programs used to monitor workers on the job and programs used to encourage or enforce company wellness programs. Both of these can disproportionately harm disabled workers who are more likely to face adverse actions in reaction to their disabilities, more susceptible to new and exacerbated injuries and illnesses in the workplace, and less able to comply with arbitrary standards for health and wellness because of their disabilities. Algorithmic management and surveillance. Companies use algorithmic decision-making systems extensively in hiring, and those systems can discriminate against disabled people applying for jobs. But algorithmic decision-making does not stop at recruitment. Automated programs can include computer software that uses a webcam or screen monitoring to capture live images or video feeds of a worker, their environment, and their activities. They can also include technologies that monitor performance and productivity to increase efficiency for the employer while reducing or eliminating workers' abilities to take breaks, rest between tasks, or move at a comfortable physical pace. Workers who take bathroom breaks while working from home or pause to rest too much while working in a warehouse can be subjected to automated discipline, including back pay for time not working, denial of promotions, and raises for inefficiency, and sometimes even termination by algorithm. An increasing number of employers across sectors have adopted intrusive software using array of sensors on workers' phones, computers, and other workplace settings to monitor the workers, evaluate their performance, make disciplinary decisions, and enforce expectations for their work. Employers use automated monitoring and assessment and evaluation software in a variety of work contexts across industries and types of workplaces, including on-site work, work requiring travel away from essential sites such as deliveries, and remote work. This software affects works in all types of jobs, including delivery, warehouses, gig work, office work, teaching, retail, and more. Alma, not to be confused with our library system, not their real name, also not to be confused with the city of Michigan, is a sick, disabled, neurodivergent, Asian American, genderqueer academic with multiple disabilities. They shared this story. My previous employer always said they do not hover over their employees' shoulders and they do not micromanage their employees. I came to find out this was not my case. My supervisor was spying on my Outlook calendar schedule and online activity as an administrator who can view all that I do. I am a sick, disabled, and neurodivergent person. I require breaks in between meetings. When she found out I was taking breaks, she began to micromanage my schedule, my tasks, my time. She also had access as an admin of our meetings. I know advising software, that keeps track of advisor-student meetings. I know a lot of advisors who are being policed through this software, how many students we meet with, what we discuss, whether our notes are thorough enough, are we making enough referrals. Okay, now I'm starting to feel bad for the advisors on the Navigate system. Oy. Oy. They look at the number of students you're meeting with as a measure of success instead of quality of interactions. Again, we have the same issue in libraries. It's like, quantity's not always what you need here. I pushed back and developed qualitative surveys, which showed that even though I had fewer meetings with students, each meeting was quality where I took the time to learn from them, listen, and how I can support them. Automating worker and workflow management, discipline, promotions, and terminations can cause and exacerbate disabilities as well as constitute disability discrimination. Enforcing faster pace of work and higher pressure on the job can push workers to dangerous extremes and potentially put them at risk for physical injury, either in a single accident or by causing repetitive motion injuries. That pressure can also cause higher rates of mental health distress, determined as job strain by industrial and organizational psychologists. That itself can constitute a disability as it causes and exacerbates anxiety, depression, cognitive disability, and trauma responses. Further, algorithmically enforced work-based policies can punish workers who need additional cognitive processing time or pressing bathroom needs due to a wide range of possible disabilities and chronic illnesses. Such policies and practices disproportionately harm disabled workers who often require opportunities for rest, flexibility, and supportive work environments to attend to disability-related needs. Disabled people, regardless of race or gender, are more than twice as likely to be unemployed in the United States as non-disabled people, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Disabled workers who work in low-wage and precarious jobs without other financial support are particularly vulnerable to exploitive and dangerous practices because of the need to keep a job no matter how unsafe or unjust the working conditions. Disabled people of color face the lifelong impacts of both ableism and racism, are also more likely to face systemic employment and housing discrimination, and believe they have less bargaining power to ask and advocate for better working conditions. Additionally, these programs may be in violation of the law, both general labor laws and disability rights law, despite inconsistent avenues for enforcement. Employers who adopt bossware systems, particularly those that are used to assess employee performance or perform managerial functions, will violate the Americans with Disabilities Act if they use them to target or unfairly disadvantage disabled workers, or if they deploy such systems without providing disabled workers an opportunity to request accommodation. Non-disabled workers also enjoy some protection as well under the Occupational Safety and Health Act. The OSHA established a research unit within the CDC called the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, NIOSH, to identify and study threats to workers' health, as well as a federal agency, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, to issue and enforce regulations protecting worker safety. And I've just heard Trump has deleted a whole bunch of these recently, which is kind of interesting. The OSHA Act requires employers to comply with OSHA regulations and also imposes a general duty on employers to protect workers from recognized hazards to their health and safety. Although no published NIOSH studies examine the efforts of bossware specifically, and numerous NIOSH studies have demonstrated the dangers of job strain, repetitive motion injuries, and fatigue, making those threats well recognized and at least arguably subject to employers' general obligation to protect world's well-being under OSHA. Nevertheless, OSHA has not issued standards specifically protecting workers from these harms, either as a general matter or in the context of automated surveillance and management systems. Additionally, the OSHA Act doesn't give individual workers the right to sue employers for health and safety violations, and OSHA's enforcement authority is quite limited compared to other agencies such as the EEOC and DOL that enforce laws protecting workers. Monitoring workers' health via employee-sponsored health and wellness programs. Yeah, this is one of the reasons why I don't do mine, right up there with, you don't even know how fat I am. I think I said it already. Y'all don't need to know. Like, bad enough I know my doctor knows, okay? While employers may be turning to algorithm-driven decision-making to enforce a dangerous pace of work and to surveil workers to the detriment of their mental health, some are ironically implementing health and wellness programs to the supposed benefit of those employees. These programs, which are typically voluntary, can provide benefits and pay incentives for participating workers to achieve weight, heart health, walking, smoking cessation, or dietary goals, all of which may be assessed with biometric data or tracked in an app or shared with the employer. Additionally, employers may not only also positive incentives to encourage participation in the programs, but may also impose sanctions for employees who decline to participate, such as additional insurance surcharges. I don't think we get extra charge, but I do know that everyone who does and meets like the wellness program junk does get lower insurance, because that's like the thing everyone keeps floating by me. It's like, well, it does lower your insurance by like a quarter, and I'm like, yeah, but you also have the university knowing intimate stuff about you. I'm not okay with that. I'm just not okay. I'm just not. Like I will pay the extra 30 to 40% to not have the university know that about me, frankly. None of your business. None of your business. None of your business. Health programs can inherently discriminate against disabled workers whose disabilities and chronic illnesses may make it impossible to achieve a healthy standard as judged by expectations for non-disabled people who are also thin and conventionally attractive, even though fatness and disability do not necessarily mean a person is unhealthy or unwell. In 2016, the EEOC issued a final rule on workplace wellness programs in Title I of the Americans with Disabilities Act, stipulating that such programs cannot ask for or require disability-specific information, and that incentives for health contingent programs must be equally available to disabled and non-disabled workers alike. In practice, however, incentivizing workers to lower blood pressure, walk a certain number of paces a day, lose weight, or reduce cholesterol places undue pressure on disabled workers to either opt out and not receive any incentives, or participate knowing they may be unable to attain the program's stated goals. Yeah, that's not my problem. My problem is just my employer know what the hell's up with my medical. And they're like, they don't give them that much information. They just give them the basic bio. I'm like, no, you don't need to know. You don't need to know any of my numbers. Additionally, data collected by wellness programs could easily be accessed by third parties if not protected sufficiently. Third-party sharing can further jeopardize disabled people's privacy and increase risk of discrimination. Such information may not be protected by HIPAA if it is not held with the healthcare provider, though some wellness programs are provided for as part of an employer-sponsored group health plan. City employees in Houston, Texas, for instance, were required to share information about their disease history, drug and seatbelt use, blood pressure, and other delicate information with an online wellness company whose authorization form disclosed the company might share information with third-party vendors and even places viewable to the public. Disabled people already face frequent invasions of privacy and risk of heightened discrimination because of their disability status, making health-related data potentially available to unregulated, uncontrolled third parties or the public is dangerously invasive. Recommendations. The EEOC, Department of Labor, and other regulators should issue clear guidance on how health-related apps and software used in employer-sponsored wellness programs, as well as employer policies and incentives attached to such programs, must comply with non-discrimination laws, including disability rights laws. Such guidance should also ensure that employee participation in these programs remains meaningfully voluntary and does not potentially single out disabled people for declining to participate. Now, should conduct additional research on the effects of bossware on workers' mental and physical health. I'm pretty sure it's bad. OSHA should adopt specific standards requiring employers to eliminate the harmful effects of bossware. Let's see if we have a conclusion. We do. Disabled people face heightened risk and danger from surveillance tools and algorithm-driven systems in a range of contexts. While these tools are often aimed at preventing bad outcomes, such as academic dishonesty and threats of violence, or nominally aimed at incentivizing positive outcomes, such as improved health and efficiency at work, disabled people are often at a severe disadvantage when surveillance is used to make decisions about them. This report discussed a wide variety of instances where disabled people were discriminated against, had their lives made more difficult, or otherwise harmed because a poorly trained algorithm or artificial intelligence system did not incorporate the needs of disabled people. Fortunately, there are ways to prevent this from happening. Our recommendations and cited materials provide a starting point for policymakers, companies, and advocates. Effective policy change must address the overarching objectives of algorithmic surveillance tools and, by addressing underlying harmful policies, obviate the need for use of dangerous algorithmic surveillance tools. Regulatory intervention must take into account suspect promises that technological programs can self-audit for bias and discrimination, or that simply equalizing outcomes will sufficiently address harmful impacts of algorithmic surveillance tools. Many of these tools' actual purposes are themselves questionable at best and unjust at worst. And effective regulation will not only limit what data schools, employers, police, courts, and private software companies can collect in their respective contexts, but how they can use it, how long it would be retained, who can access it, and what its overall purpose may be for. Sorry, I'm just dragging this around for no reason. Only then can we make progress in addressing this problem. And if you've stayed here for nearly 1.5 hours, thank you for enduring this very long thing. I thought it was pretty interesting, although I will openly admit that I probably shouldn't have spent so much time reading it with you, but I had fun. And sometimes in my life, that is all that matters. I'm trying to get this all in one shot. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments. If you've had any interesting discrimination experience as a disabled person with or without AI, love to hear it.